So here it is. Here is our GoPro. All right, so here we go, guys. We have our L10 male connector. It's got all of the things that we need to connect to the BBSHD for now. All right, guys, so there it is. We got the custom cover on there. We got it all wired up. I've got the L10 connector coming out of it, all wired up to the BBSHD. So then now we can connect this L10 connector to the Phaserunner and use that controller instead. Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. So recently I bought a BBSHD, the Bafang 1000 watt mid-drive motor that we have right here. I'm going to be doing a new build with the BBSHD, but this build is going to be different than your typical BBSHD build where it's on 48 volts or 52 volts with the stock controller. This build we're going to get on a different controller and it's going to be on high voltage. So this is something that I've wanted to try for a while, is a high voltage BBSHD build. From what I understand, when you get the BBSHD on high voltage, you don't have to shift the bike as much, you know, with your bike's derailleur, and you can almost run your bike with like a single sprocket because the motor spins so fast. So it's about maybe like 15 or 20 miles an hour with a BBSHD, but then you have to shift it, right, when you're on just kind of the stock voltages. But I want to get this on a high voltage, and then you can basically just leave the BBSHD in one, like in your granny gear on your cassette, and it'll go a lot faster and you don't have to shift as much. So I would like to try that out. So what I just did was I took the 3 bolts out of the controller. So this is the stock controller that comes with the BBSHD right here, and we're going to take the stock controller. Let's see, we're pulling it out here. And so when I originally took this motor apart in my previous video, there was a lot of silicone and stuff that I kind of had to break through to get this controller out. So that work is already done, and now I just take out those 3 bolts, disconnect these phase wires, and then there's a couple connectors in here that we can undo and pop out. Let's see. I got the controller disconnected from the BBSHD. So now the challenge is, so how do we connect this to a different controller, right? So let's think about this. So what wires do we have here? What connections do we have? So these big thick wires are the phase wires, right? And there's a yellow, blue, and a green phase wires. So there's 3 of them, and those are hooked up to the copper windings in the motor, right? So these are the wires where most of the electricity goes that makes the motor go. All right, so we got the 3 phase wires, and then what else do we have on this controller? We've got this thing. This is like a little female 4-pin JST, and this guy is for the pedal assist. So I think there's like a 5 volt, a ground, and then there's a couple wires for the pedal assist. Is probably how that works. And then this guy, this is like a 6-pin. Is that a JST? I don't know. But so this connector has 6 pins, and if we look at the wires here, it looks like it's got the 5 volt ground, and then there's a gray, white, and a blue, and then a purple, right? So 6 wires, and my understanding is it's 5 volt ground. So there's going to be 3 wires right here that are for the hulls, right? 1 for each color of the phase. And then this last purple wire, I guess, is for a temperature sensor, but not all BBSHDs have temperature sensors installed in them. So it's possible that this last purple wire isn't going to be doing anything for me, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So what we have to do is we got to figure out, how do I wire up this BBSHD to a different controller, right? So let's go look at the controller that I want to use for this. All right, so here's the controller that I'm going to use with the high voltage BBSHD. It should be no surprise to anyone who's familiar with my channel So I've got the Grin Technologies Phaserunner V6. All right, so that's this guy. And I like this controller because it's nice and small. It looks cool. There's a lot of like programmability and customization, and I like all of the other Grin Tech accessories like the Cycle Analyst and all that stuff. So I've got another Phaserunner controller for this. So, but how do we hook? So how do we hook the BBSHD up to the Phaserunner, right? Because this Phaserunner has an L10 connector, right? And it looks like this. So it's the female L10 connector. So like that, this isn't gonna work, right? This isn't gonna work. Like we can't just plug this in there. So how are we gonna do this? So inside of here, how these L10 connectors work, and I don't know if you can see this. I'll put a better picture on the screen, but so these L10 connectors, they have 3 big pins that are for the phase wires, and then there's another 7 pins in here, and so 3 of those other pins are for the Hall sensors, right? And then there's a 5 volt and there's a ground, right? So similar to what's in the BBSHD. And then I think there's a pin for temperature and there's a pin for the speed. Like if you have a hub motor, the speed would come through this cable from the motor, right? So I'm not going to be bringing the speed through this L10 connector, but basically everything else, you know, the 3 phase wires, we've got 3 phase wires right here, right? And then there's 3 of these pins that are for the Hall sensors. So that's going to be right here. The gray, white, and blue wires right here on this controller right here. Those were the Hall sensors. So we're going to have to hook into this little connector right here and bring those Hall sensor wires through here somehow, right? So you got 3 phase wires, 3 Hall sensor wires, and then the 5 volt and the ground. So all of these things in the BBSHD we can bring through an L10 connector, but we don't have an L10 connector hooked over here, right? Like we need the other side of this thing just to like plug it into the BBSHD so we can make it happen, right? So how do we do that? How can we get, so this is the female L10 right here. So how would we hook a male L10 up to the BBSHD so we can do this? Well, that's what I'm going to attempt. So we're going to attempt here today. All right, so I would like to get my BBSHD wired up to an L10 connector, right? And so the one that I'm going to want is the male end of it, right? Because there's a male and female end to these L10 connectors. So right here, this is an L10 motor cable extension, right? So this is a motor cable extension, and it's got one side that's male, and then it's got one side that's female, right? So the female side is the one that's got the holes in it, and the male side is this one. So this is the one that we want, right? So ideally, we would get all of these wires of the BBSHD connected to this connector, right? So I'm going to have to cut this somewhere and then split all those wires out and then connect all of the wires to the inside of the BBSHD. And then the BBSHD will have this guy coming out of it, and then we can just plug this into the Phaserunner, right? So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to cut this. We're going to have to cut it and then strip a little bit of the insulation off of it, and then kind of split all of the little wires out. We'll wire up all the wires. So let's do this. Let's do this. So where do I want to cut this? Let's see. So this is going to be coming out of the BBSHD. Let's see here. Where is the hole going to be? So let's see how this is going to look. Like if we wanted to use this piece of housing, we would have to clean all of this stuff out and then get the controller out of the housing That might be possible, but it's not going to be easy, right? And then you'd also have like a BBSHD controller that's out of the housing that, you know, isn't really useful. So usually when you upgrade your BBSHD to high voltage, you take this controller off, right? And then you buy a different cover for the BBSHD. So I got this one. This is a custom cover from Lunicycle. So how this is gonna work is this is gonna go on here instead, and it's going to cover all of our new custom wiring that we do to get this thing on 72 volts. So that is how it's gonna look. I actually wish I could have just bought a black one of these because I like just the plain black look a little bit more. I might change this in the future. I don't know how much I really like this design, but for now we just need a cover where we can get another cover back on the motor and protect all of the internals and the wiring, right? So this is the one I'm going to use for now, but we're getting ahead of ourselves because first we need to get this cable, this L10 cable, wired up to the BBSHD. So since our Phaserunner has a female end of it, we want the male end of it, right? So this end is the side that we want. So I am basically gonna cut this. So I don't really need this side. Like, I have spare ones of these female connectors, and I would like this motor connector from the BBSHD to be as long as possible. So I don't care so much about this female end. I want this one, I want it to be nice and long, so I'm probably gonna cut it just like way down here. So I mean, if we wanted to use, I'm gonna cut this off so that I still have this as a spare, and it'll have a little bit of slack if you wanna use it for something. But chances are I'm not gonna use it for anything ever, and so we're just gonna cut it like this. Oh, right, you can see all the wires that are smushed inside of there quite tightly. So there's the female end that we don't really need. And then here is the male end that we do need, right? So I'm gonna take this, put it aside. All right, so now what I need to do is we're gonna cut some of this insulation off of this cable. So let's see, we don't want to cut our fingers. Oh yeah, that's some thick insulation, buddy. Let's see. So with wire insulation, you can usually just kind of cut and score it a little bit like that. And then, so it looks like it's got some kind of like paper inside of here. So I'm just going to keep going a little bit, making sure not to cut myself. Let's see here. And we're going to strip this insulation back enough. I'm probably going to do a little bit more because I want some room. So let's see. So I think this should be good. So then what you can do is just kind of like score it going around. And then it should just rip off pretty easily like that. Right, so here's the insulation that we got off of there. Here is kind of, what is this, like a fiber paper or something? We'll get that all the way. Alright, so let's see. So we've got our 3 phase wires, or the big thick wires here. So let's kind of bend those out a bit. And then we've got our other, oh man, our other little teeny tiny wires that are crazy tiny. Those wires are extremely small. And then it looks like there's a number of wires in this as well. Let's see. So it looks like there's 3. So these, I think these must be the Hall sensor wires. Let's see. Alright, so this is what my L10 connector looks like when I've stripped the insulation off of the cable. And I cut the insulation all the way, kind of stripped it off, and so now we can see all of the individual wires that are in this L10 motor cable. Right, so we've got the 3 phase wires, these big thick wires, right, that we want to hook up to our phase wires on our motor. Then in this thing, we've got the 3 Hall sensor wires that we're going to want to hook up to where those 3 Hall sensor wires were in the stock controller, which is like this white, blue, and gray wire, right? This red wire is a 5 volt, black wire is ground. Those wires correspond to the red wire and the black wire right here, right? That's how we're gonna connect those up. And then we've got our 3 Hall sensor wires over here. So in the future, I think I can hook up the temperature sensor. I mean, I'll hook it up anyways, just in case there's a temperature sensor inside of the BBSHD, but there probably isn't. You know, considering this is just a random AliExpress BBSHD, there's probably no temperature sensor in there. But, so, what we need to do here is connect all of these wires in there, right? So, that's going to be probably the most involved part of this process. And so the phase wires, they have these spade connectors crimped on there already. I'll have to see if I have any spade connectors that'll just plug into there. I might, I'm not sure. I'll have to see. I'll have to go check. Alright, so what I'm going to start out with is the big phase wires, because these are the biggest wires and they're going to be the simplest to connect. So if we look on here, it says this is 12 to 10. So that's the gauge of the wire. So these phase wires are 12 gauge, and these spade connectors are made for 12 to 10 gauge, right? And so these spade connectors, like, they're kind of standardized, right? So I've got some right here, Wi-Fi insulated heat shrink connectors, and then so the ones that we want to use are the quick disconnect. Those are the spade connectors, right? So I've taken 3 of these guys out. So these are called spade connectors. It says 12 gauge to 10 gauge. And it seems like they fit in there reasonably well, and they stick in there pretty good. So for starters, I think I'll start out by using some of those connectors and just going with the quick disconnect spade connectors for these phase wires, right? So basically, we're gonna have to strip the insulation off this wire a little bit, put this connector on there, crimp it on there so it stays on there, and then there's also heat shrink on there that you can shrink on there as well, right? So that's what I'm going to do for these 3 phase wires, and then we'll be able to hook them onto the phase wires of the motor. So let's get our wire strippers and we'll get them going in there. Hopefully you can see what's going on. So I'm going to strip off about this much of it. Like that. So now we've got that phase wire, the insulation stripped off of that phase wire. You can see that little piece of it right here. I gotta get my crimpers. So I've got my crimping tool over here. Okay, so it seems like I've got the right attachment on my crimpers, so I should be able to get this guy going on here. And then the crimpers are color coded. You can see there's a yellow slot right there. So I'm just gonna take my crimpers, open them up, put it into that yellow slot, and we're gonna hold it in place while we crimp it down. And then sometimes I like to take the crimpers and then bring it down onto the smaller size as well, just so you really kind of smush it in there. So let's actually, let's see, that seems like it's okay. So after you crimp things, you want to do the pull test and make sure that it can't just yoink right out. All right, so we can see right here, like, the wire got crimped in there. We're giving it a good tug and it's not coming out. So now, since these are heat shrinking, we can go like this. Oh. Alright, so that thing is crimped on there. The heat shrink is heat shrunken. So now we just got to do that for the other two phase wires, and then we'll have those phase wires all wired up to a spade connector. So we're just gonna go in here, strip this off. Alright, my GoPro's overheating already, but we're crimping on the phase wires, baby. Okay. Heat shrink it on there. Okay, so now I've got a spade connector connected onto each one of these phase wires, so that I should be able to just plug them in like this, and as soon as you press them in there, like, they stick in there pretty good. You know, it takes a fair bit of like pulling to get them apart, so that should work. Now, it would be better to just solder these wires together, right? So I could have done that. For now, I'm just gonna use these spade things just because it's simpler, it's faster, it'll get things going. Later on, if I'm feeling like I need to make this connection better, I could always cut these connectors off, strip the insulation off the wire a little bit, do the same over here, and then you could just solder these. So now, this next part is the tricky bit, right? Because so these are our phase wires, we got that sorted, but we've got to connect all these little tiny teeny wires, or at least most of these wires, right? Because we've got the 3 hall sensors over here. There's a yellow, green, and blue hall sensor, and then we've got to connect this red and the black one, right? And then I think also this gray one. And then this white one is going to be unused. But all of these wires need to connect into this thing right here, right? This, you know, so it needs to connect, it needs to be like a little connector like this. I don't know if this is called a JST connector or what this is called. I don't have any of these. So what we're going to do is, I'm probably just gonna cut this off of this controller so that I can solder all of these little tiny wires into these wires, and then I'll just plug this same white connector into the motor in here. And I hate cutting these wires off of this controller, but I don't really plan on using this stock controller anytime soon. You know, I don't really plan on using this stock controller anytime soon, and I want to keep this project moving. Like, I don't want to wait. I don't want to have to order a bunch of these connectors and then wait days for them to come in the mail. So I'm probably just going to cut this connector off of here, just because I want to keep this project moving, and I don't want to have to wait on another week just for these little connectors to show up. So the smallest that my wire strippers right here go is like a 20 gauge, but as you can see, this wire is just sliding right through that 20 gauge slot in my strippers. So these wires are extremely tiny, and you're gonna need a wire stripper. If you're doing it the way that I'm doing it, you're gonna need a wire stripper that can strip some very tiny wires. So I'm gonna have to figure out how we can strip all of these tiny wires here so that we can get them wired up. And we're gonna use this thing, right? So let's, I hate doing it, but oh, there it is. Okay, so now we got this with all of our little wires that we need. Alright, so doesn't look super pretty. I don't even know if the camera can see it, but I've got a little blob of solder that I connected these two wires with. And so what I'm going to do is just put a little bit of electrical tape over this to make sure that it's insulated, just to go around that guy. So that should hopefully stay connected. Now we just got to keep going with all of these other wires and get those connected as well. And so I'll show you the process I'm doing again to do this. I'm going to cut some of this insulation with my knife. And you can kind of feel when the knife gets through the insulation and starts hitting the wires. If you can kind of feel it. So at that point you want to stop, give it a bit of a pinch and a pull, and there we go. So we got that one stripped, right? And then it's kind of the same process for stripping the other wires. I think I'm gonna work down the wires this way though, just so that we can kind of have room to work. So let's strip the insulation off of this one right here. Okay. So the best way that I found to strip these little wires is just kind of like pin it down against a table or something, and then hold it still, and then kind of gently saw at it a little bit with the utility knife until you feel the metal. And then as long as you score the insulation good enough, you should be able to use a fingernail and then just kind of like pull at it. Oh, and there it comes. So that's how I got that little bit of insulation off of this hall sensor wire. So I'm just stripping all of the insulation off of these hall sensor wires. I don't know what this one is. Probably unused. So let's get the insulation off of this yellow hall sensor wire next. Okay. So you can see that I've stripped the insulation off of all of these wires, and I'm going to solder them all up to the motor connector wires. And I have like a wiring diagram that I kind of did here on my computer. I'll put that on the screen so that you can see how I'm doing this a little bit better. But that's basically what I'm doing. So I'm going to keep going with this and solder all these wires together. And so I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here, but I've basically taken the strands of the copper from each of the wires and then kind of like got them all going up into each other. You might have to get something else to kind of hold all of this together while you're soldering it, because these little tiny wires, like if the wind blows, they can move around. So alright, so there is the solder job on those wires. Got a nice chunk of solder on there. They are one continuous wire now. That solder is holding them together nice and good. And I'm going to do the same with the rest of these wires. Alright, so we've got some solder on those wires, hold them together. You can kind of give them just a little tiny tug just to make sure they're connected and it's not going to like fall apart easily. And then we'll get some electrical tape on the green one and then we'll keep going. So now the next one we got to do is this gray one, and that is going to connect to my the yellow Hall sensor. So I'm going to do the same thing. We're going to get this wire kind of coming up this way and then get these wires kind of going into each other. Hardest part is just kind of getting it to sit together while you solder it, because these wires are so small and there's so many of these little tiny wires like right next to each other. There's not a whole lot of room to work with, but we're going to get some solder on here. Alright, so we've got the ground wire connected, soldered on to the JST. And finally, we're just going to do this red connector. Alright, so that is the final wire that we need to solder into this connector. Doing the pull test to make sure that it's solid. It feels nice and solid. So let's get that one taped up. These Hall sensor wires in the L10 connector were in their own little like tinfoil sheath. And then there's just like this stranded wire in there that's just kind of on its own with no insulation. I wonder what that's for. I'm not sure. And then there's this other wire that's used for the speed sensor on a hub motor. And since I'm not using these two wires, what I'm gonna do is we're just gonna like grab those guys and kind of get them going like this. And then I'm just gonna like tape them right onto the end of this, so that we don't have wires like jangling around all over in there, especially that bare, like that one that doesn't have any insulation and it's just stranded wires. Alright, so let's cut that thing off. Okay. Alright, So here it is. Here is our GoPro. All right, so here we go, guys. We have our L10 male connector. It's got all of the things that we need to connect to the BBSHD for now. I'm not connecting anything to the pedal assist in the BBSHD yet. We're just gonna connect the phase wires, we're gonna connect the hall wires, and then the 5 ground or the 5 volt in the ground, and then we've got the thermistor connected in there too. I'm not sure if there's a thermistor in here, but if there is, the wire should be in the right spot for it to work. All right, so now we're gonna connect the phase wire into the motor. All right, so you've got this blue one. Let's get that spade connector hooked up. And then we've got this yellow one that we can hook up as well. Let's see here, is this going the right way? Okay, so these are kind of got a certain way they got to go, like that. And then the green one we can get hooked in there like that. Okay, and then this guy, let's see, this white guy we need to plug in down there. I need to go get my cover, my custom cover that's going to cover all this up. Okay guys, so I think how this is going to work is I'm going to have this wire coming out like this, right? Because this is where the hole for the cover is. And then I'm gonna have the phase wires all smushed in there like this. It was a little bit difficult to get the phase wires smushed in there. I think this is like the literal only way that I can really smush them in there, because these connectors, like, you can't bend this part where this connector is, so it's just, it probably would have been better just to solder these on there, but for now I'm just gonna use those connectors. And then so we're gonna get all this stuff smushed in here. Gonna connect the JST down into the motor. So we have those connections going. Let's get that snapped back on there. And then we wanna make sure that those wires are kind of like tucked away inside of here and they're not gonna get pinched when we close this thing back up. I don't think anything's getting pinched. I think that should be good. Where's my Allen? Alright, so we're getting our custom BBSHD cover going on. And you want that pretty snug, nice and tight, so that that little rubber gasket is waterproofing everything. Alright guys, so there it is. We got the custom cover on there. We got it all wired up. I've got the L10 connector coming out of it, all wired up to the BBSHD. So then now we can connect this L10 connector to the Phaserunner and use that controller instead. And it should be all good. We're gonna have to be careful of this motor cable. Like, you're not gonna want to pull on this motor cable at all. You're gonna want to be very gentle with this motor cable, or I am, right? But so we wired up the motor cable kind of like this, like my exquisite wiring diagram. So we've got the L10 all wired up. We should be able to connect this into the Phaserunner and then start messing around with the Phaserunner controller and higher voltage on our BBSHD. So that is this part of the build. So hopefully that was interesting for you guys. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know how it's going. Let me know what you think. Am I doing it all wrong? Should I have bought the pre-built kit, the high voltage kit? Let me know in the comments, guys. And I'll see you next time. See you in the next video. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching.